Hi friends, today we're going to be discussing disturbing movie scenes. In fact, we're going to be discussing some of the most disturbing scenes of all time, the most infamous ones. That is the name of this iceberg. A huge shout out to Huckleberry OK499 who put this on Reddit. They also put that it's ranked by graphic content. To make this worth your time, I am doing this all in one video. I'm going to talk about every single scene on this iceberg. It's a lot. It's a lot. A lot of these I had seen already, but there was a couple that were new to me and quite shocking. Again, content warning, we're going to be discussing everything. It's as bad as you think it is. It is mostly horror movies, but there are some disturbing movies put in here. So it kind of starts off with jump scares, but it will be very obvious. I won't show you any graphic content, but I will show you what I can. Also, my apologies for any censorship in this video. I have a feeling it might not do well. YouTube might not be happy with me, but I'm going to try and censor some of my language. I don't like doing this, but the reason is because if it gets demonetized, that's one thing, but if it gets age restricted, then it will not get pushed out to anyone. And I would hate for my 100+ hours of working on this video to go to waste and you guys don't even get to see it and I can't share it with you. A huge thank you to my Patreon who does keep my channel afloat. You guys know I don't do many sponsorships. I don't get many sponsorship deals. So it really is my Patreon who allow me to do these videos that may not go places. If you do want to find out more about my Patreon, it's always linked down below. The lowest tier is just $2 a month and you get bonus videos every single week. Those are vlogs, spoiler chats after I go and watch a film at the cinema, trailer reactions, videos like that every single week. Other tiers have access to my Discord and hangout parties. It's a lot of fun, and if you want to check it out, it's always linked down below. In terms of censoring myself, it's going to be very obvious what I'm talking about, but if I do have to speak in code, when I say end or ended, usually that means someone else has taken someone else's life, so they have ended them. Crown may be substituted for using the word head too much. An instrument can mean you'll understand within the context. I promise I won't do it unless it's absolutely necessary and you'll very much understand what I'm talking about. That all being said, YouTube, if you're listening, we're talking about fictional movies today. Fictional. This is fiction. It's all fiction. Nothing here is real besides Divine, but we'll get to her. And the last thing, sorry, I do hate doing long intros, but it's very much needed and this is a long video. There's gonna be spoilers as we go. I'm only gonna give spoilers when you need context to understand the scene we're talking about, or if the spoiler is in that scene. Otherwise, I'll try and keep it vague, but I'll very much explain the scene at hand. Sometimes you need to be led into the situation, but sometimes you don't need any information, and you can still check out the film afterwards if you're interested. You may not be interested after what we're going to talk about. Okay, let's start at the top. Here is tier 1. We have a jump scare to start with. This is the Insidious scene with the demon face. I also call this the lipstick demon, and I love this scene. This one comes from Insidious, which is about a family who are dealing with their son being trapped in a comatose state where he travels to a place called the Further. In this scene, mother-in-law Lorraine sits down with her daughter and son-in-law to tell them about a dream she had last night, which felt more like a warning. As we're being lured into the scene, there's an ambient droning backtrack and there's creaky doors. We're expecting something to scare us, and although we do see the demon lurking in the corner within her dream, it's not until we pivot back to the dining room, the red-faced demon appears behind her son-in-law, Josh, and the music heightens. It's a jump scare and it's a great one. I can see why this is infamous or just memorable. And for a standalone horror movie of the time, it really got people talking. I like the idea that you feel like you're returning to a safe conversation and the worst has happened, and jump scare He's right there. Next, we have Carrie, and I think it's really interesting they went with this scene because when I think of Carrie, I think of the shower scene. That is the big one for me, but maybe not for everybody. And this scene isn't even the prom scene. This scene takes place after the events of the entire movie, which is full of destruction and violence and terror. But this is the final jump scare of the movie, and it predates Friday the 13th. You know, the Friday the 13th jump scare at the end. It predates that. that, but I do think it's very much the same idea. Here we see poor Sue visiting Carrie's grave when suddenly a hand bursts out and grabs her arm. But Sue, of course, wakes up and it's revealed it's a dream sequence, which is very typical. This is a very typical scene in a 70s, late 70s, 80s horror movie. But it gets you every time. They do well, but not the most infamous scene for me from the film, but a good one nonetheless. Okay, next we're gonna go way forward in time. This is the birthday party sighting, or just they call it birthday party, from Signs. The movie is layered, but it is about an alien invasion, and this takes place after the main characters have just come to terms with the fact that there are crop circles on their property. The character Meryl wakes up to a chilling news report showing a father who has just filmed a birthday party when an alien suddenly appears. Now, this is an infamous scene because I watched this when I was 12 and it freaked me the hell out. I can say a lot of people, when they saw this for the first time, they were not expecting it. The way it morphs from nothing is really startling. And again, it's the safe situation of a birthday party showing some kind of innocence. And then this alien is so out of place and catches you off guard. It's quite shocking. I love this scene. And the fact that it is shown through a TV, it gives it a little bit more of an element of found footage, but also I feel like they can hide some of the bad special effects from the audience that way. It was very clever the way it was revealed. And then we also get the shock of the main character who sees this. So it's like a double whammy or triple whammy. I think a lot of people were also shocked by this because it happens in broad daylight. The graphics may not have aged well after 20 years, but again, it's hidden within the quality of the tape. The next scene comes from the Omen 2, and it's the elevator scene. This is another scene I thought was a very big surprise because there is no Damien, it's all for you from the original Omen scene in this list, which I think is one of the most infamous moments in all of the Omen franchise. But I'll take this, I'll take anything from the Omen, and this is quite a unique kill. You don't need too much context for this, but just know that we're following Dr. Kane, who has just learned a little too much about who Damien really is, and he takes one last wild elevator ride. At first, the elevator seems possessed and it looks like he's going to take a Tower of Terror ride, but the cable snaps, which instead of having him plummeting down and dropping, the pulley system is insanely strong, and with such a sharp rope, his body is separated. This is more of a kill scene instead of a jump scare, but I like that you thought it was going to go one way and it went the other. Very creative. Okay, it is a big jump to go from that to the next one, which is The Mist, the ending. This is obviously the ending of the film, so it's going to be a big spoiler. And what is fantastic about this is it's based on a Stephen King story, but they changed it in the film. They changed the ending completely. And Stephen King said that the ending was so good, he wished he came up with it by himself, but it was truly terrifying. And I can tell you, this is one of the most depressing endings of any film. In this film, a group of random people must work together when strange, deadly entities take over their town, existing in this newly formed mist. We follow a small portion of this group as they finally escape a chaotic situation in hopes to find a shelter. But as they roll through their mist, their car runs out of gas. So their car rolls to a halt, and it is just agreed upon them that they need to end themselves to put themselves out of torture or whatever is going to happen to them from the entities. So David, the main character, does have an instrument, but there's only enough in that instrument to end everyone in the car, including his son. So he does this. And then he gets out of the car because he doesn't have anything left. And he is going to sacrifice himself up to the entities, obviously battling with the traumatizing thing he's just done and everything that he's been through. But just in this moment, the mist dissipates and help rolls on through. Trucks and trucks full of help and survivors. So what happened a couple of minutes prior could have been completely avoided. It is damning, and it is definitely a scene that is infamous. You'll never forget it. It's totally disturbing. I would have put this much lower down. Next though is Saw, and it's the reverse Beartrap. We're going to talk about Saw quite a bit on this list for obvious reasons, the brutality of it all. But for those who don't know, Saw is about a killer who is called the Jigsaw Killer and puts people in certain situations where they have to go through puzzles, very destructive puzzles, in order to live up to his strange moral compass. I know that sounds really weird the way I'm describing it, but that's what it is. Basically, he thinks people are not appreciating their life, and so he decides to take it upon himself to put them through torture so that they appreciate their life. He's a complicated human being. So in this scene, we see Amanda, who becomes one of the most iconic characters in the franchise. And this is kind of our introduction to her. She wakes up in a room with a device locked to her jaw, and she finds out the rules of the game are if the timer goes off before she escapes, it will snap with her attached. But if she finds the key within time, she can get herself out. Just so happens that the key is inside her cellmate, who we then find out is alive. The scene's editing is erratic, which is very normal for these films. None of the traps give the audience the time to think with the erratic editing. It's almost like you're in the mind of the victim who's trying to work through what they must do, because it's that level of anxiety just watching them. There's lots of fluid going on as she does retrieve the key and she lives. But the reverse bear trap, just the design of it, went down in history, so I can understand why this is definitely an iconic and infamous scene. Another one I probably wouldn't have chosen is the descent first encounter. Not that this is bad, this is a very memorable scene, but I prefer the pickaxe scene. That's the one that always sticks in my head from this film, but I absolutely adore this film, and if you haven't seen it, I urge you to see it, because I'm not going to be ruining much for you, and there's a lot to discover. The movie is about a bunch of friends who reunite for a caving expedition, but things go wrong and they are trapped deep inside this cave with unknown entities. And this scene happens almost 1 hour in. You kind of already know as the viewer what these entities are. You've kind of seen them in the background and watching this group of people, but this is the first time they encounter them. At the start of the scene, they're starting to get very frustrated with each other, kind of turning on each other, arguing, screaming out for help. One of them is using a lighter to try and see around, while the other one uses their camcorder night vision, and that's how this comes out. Basically, they're panning around the cave, and then they just swing back to their friend, and right behind them, it's revealed one of these entities is just towering over them, standing over them, and it's the first time you get a proper good look at the detail, and the creature design in this film is phenomenal, terrifying, and very unique. It's a quick moment, but it's a great jump scare. The next film is Hereditary, and this is Sealing. There are some other Hereditary scenes, and this one was very confusing that it was called Sealing, because a couple of things happen on the ceiling during this movie. So I couldn't quite work out which one it is. We're going to go through a couple here just to make sure we cover everything. Please let me know in the comments which one out of these 3 different scenes you think is the ceiling scene, the infamous ceiling scene. So these all happen when the climax of the film has set in, which is when Peter discovers he is at the center of a demonic conspiracy and transformation. I've put them in order of getting progressively worse. So the first option is when Annie is hidden in the background shadows. She's perched at the top of Peter's room, and you can see her just hanging there while Peter is getting out of bed. A lot of people said that this terrified them on the big screen. They saw it at the cinema, or they've watched it a couple of times and never noticed it until they turned the contrast up or the brightness. The second scene is when she's chasing him through the house, and he manages to get into the attic and closes the door behind him, yelling at his mother to stop. Here we hear knocking, and he's screaming, telling her to stop, and we're just hearing knocking. And our minds, we think someone is knocking, banging on the thing for the attic to try and get in, on the ceiling, obviously. But then it's revealed that she's banging her head against the wall at a very vicious rate. So it's a very startling moment when you realize that sound is being made by her head. It's a dramatic scene, and we're not expecting her to be levitating up to the ceiling and able to be slamming her head like that, making that kind of sound. And the last option is the most graphic. This is when she is levitating towards the ceiling and Peter is watching her. I'll show you the reverse shot of Peter's face, and she is using a sharp wire back and forth over her crown to remove it. The sound is terrifying. The image is terrifying, and Peter actually jumps out the window to escape. Let me know which one you think it is. A lot of crazy things happen on the ceiling in Hereditary. What a wild film. That's not even half of the scary stuff in that movie. Okay, next, The Shining Axe. This is no ifs, whats, buts what this scene is. It is very infamous. If this was the most infamous at the very top. This one would be the first, but the person who made this said it's ranked by graphic content. So this is the It's Johnny scene, which is not only memorable in horror history, but in film history overall. We watch as Jack attempts to attack his wife Wendy after losing his mind in the Overlook Hotel. He chases her with an axe into the bathroom where she slams the door and locks it. He then uses an axe to cut through the door, sticking his head through. He yells, "Here's Johnny." This is said to be inspired by the Johnny Carson show, who introduces himself in the same way, but it was just an ad-lib. Everyone said Kubrick was a nightmare to work with because he's such a perfectionist, and they did takes upon takes upon takes, and this is just the one that got in the movie with this ad-lib line. No one knew that the line was going to make cinema history. It was not planned. Okay, next is The Exorcist III, The Nurse. This is such a good scene, and this movie went down in history because of this scene. It is in a lot of people's top 10 jump scares, and it's definitely an off-putting moment that you don't see coming. You don't need much context because it does happen before you know a lot in the movie, but we watch a static shot in the hallway of a psychiatric hospital, and a nurse, she's going back and forth doing her rounds. She's entering rooms, leaving rooms. It goes on for maybe 4 minutes before anything happens, which is why it's so startling. You're just sitting there in this atmosphere, not sure what's about to happen, until she goes into one room, she does a check, and when she walks out, the camera zooms in quickly, and following her is a villain dressed in white with a large instrument aimed at her neck. It doesn't show anything, it's not graphic, it then cuts directly to a shot of a statue. It's such a powerful scene because it's so jarring and unnerving. I love this scare. The next one is Psycho, the shower scene. This is the most infamous scene in the movie, so I'm glad they put this one here. This was another shocker because the viewer who had just locked in for the story following Marion Crane had no idea that she was about to be toast. In this movie, Marion is a secretary who is on the run because she's just stolen $40,000 from her employer. She finally finds a motel to hide out in, and we think that this is the moment where she can let her guard down finally. She's out of danger. She gets really comfortable, goes to have a shower, and just then a daring soundtrack starts and a hand opens the curtain with an instrument in the hand of the attacker. She is struck several times, and it's in black and white, but you can see the tonal change through the water going down the drain. It's not graphic at all, but it's very startling, and especially for a film where you thought she was the lead, it really switches it all around. Not only do they kill off the lead, but they killed her while she was at her most vulnerable, and it is one of the most infamous and influential scenes in horror history. Okay, tier 2 starts with Jason X, Liquid Nitrogen. This is a very creative scene. This, of course, is the installment when Jason Voorhees is cryogenically frozen and sent to space. Of course. Now, centuries later, he thaws and is revived, and this is when he's just woken up. He basically turns around, and in one of the most infamous scenes for him and in this film, he grabs a woman's face and sticks it into a nearby sink made of liquid nitrogen. Her face instantly freezes, and then he kind of taps it on the bench top, and it splits apart into millions of pieces. But it's not even the pieces, it's what's left of her crown. It's quite rosy. It's quick. They were aiming for creative. It makes no sense. A lot of people have pointed this out. At room temperature, it would evaporate into a gas instantly. But you know, Jason's also in space. This next scene is where my heart is. This is Pet Sematary, and the scene is Zelda, which is one of my favorite scenes in this film. It's one of the scenes that terrorized me as a child. This one is interesting because it's almost like a side mission of the film, which is based on a book that explores really raw and personal complicated feelings about death and loss. The movie takes a lot more of a direct approach, although they get to have a lot of fun with the visuals of Zelda. A lot of these scenes so far have been pretty self-explanatory, but this one does require a little bit of backstory. So Rachel is the mother character of the film, and her late sister's name is Zelda. And during the film, she explains her complicated relationship with her sister, who was sick during her childhood. It's important to understand what we're seeing here is her confess something at a very vulnerable moment, but also she's telling it from the perspective of when she was a child. So you remember anything that terrorized you or traumatized you as a child, it looks very different to how it actually was. So from Rachel's point of view as a child, what we're seeing is an exaggerated idea of how Zelda looked and acted. Rachel's explaining us a really horrific story about Zelda and how she was kept in the back of the house like a dirty secret. Zelda was sick, and we watch young Rachel in this flashback memory enter the room with food for her. She begins to feed Zelda, who starts to struggle to swallow. As we're watching, Rachel is describing how she felt about Zelda and how she wanted her to just end and how her family wanted her to just end. It's an awful scene where she is really being vulnerable about these dark and disgusting thoughts that she had that really plague her. Then she goes on to talk about the day that Zelda did go and how she was home alone. And in the flashback, we see Zelda convulse and Rachel run away. So all of this is part of Zelda's story, but it links in later in the film where the trauma truly comes out and more things have transpired in the movie, but like I said, this is kind of like a side quest. It's Rachel's experience with death, which links into the theme of the story. But later in the film, Rachel hears Zelda calling out to her, and in current day, she opens a door and Zelda is there tormenting her. As she enters the room, Zelda charges at the camera saying, "I finally came back for you, Rachel. I'm going to twist your back like mine and you'll never get out of bed again." Never get out of bed again. It's so terrifying. The interesting thing is that Zelda was going to be played by a 13-year-old girl. That's who she's meant to be, which is why I say it's important that you understand it's from the perspective of her as a little girl. They interviewed a lot of little girls for this role, but eventually they had to cast a full-grown man to look as exaggerated and scary as they imagine she looked in her mind. And if you look closely, you'll realize that that isn't Zelda at all. Even her outfit, what she's wearing, is a connection between Rachel's son in the film and a lot of trauma that happens with him, and he's also wearing a very similar dated outfit. It's almost like a costume for a Victorian death portrait. That movie really runs deep and a lot of people don't appreciate it the way they should. Anyway, I'm gonna move on, but it is very creepy. And I love Zelda. I love her. Okay, but let's talk about the needle pit. This would be way scarier for most people. Saw's needle pit. I just have to say that name and your skin is crawling. I know it. Amanda is back because she's always in the best ones. In Saw 2, we follow a whole group that are in the process of working through Jigsaw's unique puzzles. When it's player Xavier's turn, through a tape, Jigsaw explains that he must face the consequences similar to his job as a substance dealer. Now he has to get into a pit of these instruments and find the key. They don't have caps on, they're out there. They're pointy. His character really lets other people do the dirty work for him, which is part of the reason he's there. So he grabs Amanda and just throws her into this pit. This smash as she hits the bottom, the props sticking out of her, it is a lot. And she just starts digging. And when I say dig, she's digging both hands like this. It's horrendous. But she does find it, and within 6 seconds to spare, she tries to give the key to him, but the timer is up. I truly love Saw so much. I need to do a breakdown of every single trap. Subscribe if you haven't, because we talk about a lot of horror, a lot of thriller, and a lot of disturbing movies. Speaking of, another classic, Alien Chestburster. Another one you only have to hear the name to know exactly what's gonna happen. But as you probably all know, the people in this scene didn't know what was gonna happen. The actors had no idea. The Chestburster scene in Alien unfolds as Kane, who has seemingly recovered from a face hugger attack, suddenly convulses at the crew's dinner table. In a horrifying moment, his chest bursts open and a little slimy friend, he just pops out and he's got little tiny fangs, and then he kind of shoots off and the whole crew, their jaws are on the floor. And this is the real reaction of these actors. They knew something was going to happen in the scene, but they didn't know what or how effective it would be. And the vital fluid just really sprays everywhere, and it's in one of the actresses' eyes. It is a mess. And it's such a good scene because it feels candid. It feels like we're almost watching this moment of them bonding over dinner after this horrific accident. And it feels like it's meant to be just a transitional scene of things getting back to normal when all hell breaks loose. Okay, Sleepaway Camp ending. This is another one which is gonna need some context. This scene is so crazy because this film has gone through such a transition. When it first came out, it kind of bombed. Then it became this controversial film, and now it's been wholeheartedly accepted from different communities, and it's become such a cult classic. The movie is about a killer who's on the loose as we follow Shy Angela, who is seemingly just trying to survive her time at this camp. She's been living with her auntie ever since a boating accident took the lives of her twin brother and her father. So she's at this camp, and all of these people are going in very interesting ways, but then the shock ending reveal unfolds. In the last scene, the counselors find Angela by herself at night on the beach, and she seems to be stroking someone's crown who is laying in her lap. As they call to her to see if she's alright, she drops the crown, which in a reveal is not connected to a body, and then she stands up, revealing the ultimate twist. She is her presumed dead twin brother. We see everything. She is naked. Angela's actually Peter and completely just traumatized. I don't know another word for it. I'm not here to diagnose. And she's also been the perpetrator. But what is scary about this scene is the sound that she is making. She's hissing like an animal. You gotta watch it. It is great. It's an infamous twist that no one saw coming. Okay, next The Thing, which of course is about a group of people stuck at a research facility in Antarctica when a shape-shifting entity takes over. This scene is almost like the reverse of the Chestburster. It takes place after Norris, one of the crew, collapses and is seemingly suffering from a heart attack. Dr. Copper attempts to revive, but Norris's chest suddenly caves in and the doctor's arms are like inside of him, and then it chomps. It transforms into a fanged creature that takes his arms. The team watches in horror as Norris's body mutates further, sprouting grotesque limbs and a nightmarish spider-like head that detaches and crawls away. This scene is a perfect mix of terror and strangeness, definitely the strangeness of an alien thing, and again, it's one we were not expecting. I didn't expect anything like that to suddenly happen, did you? Which is the opposite of the next scene, which is the log truck scene in Final Destination 2, because this scene became a meme because it is something that people can relate to. In this scene, we follow Kimberly, who has a terrifying premonition of a massive highway pileup. As Kimberly and her friends drive down the highway, a log truck loses its load, sending massive logs hurling through the air, and one crashes through a windshield, instantly ending the driver. And this creates a chain reaction accident where cars start flipping, others are on fire. It is a chaotic disaster. The sequence, with its practical effects and realistic destruction, makes passengers and drivers nervous to this day. Anyone who's behind a log truck, they take photos and they post it online. It is infamous for that reason. Next, we have Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and it's the dinner scene. I don't know if I would have picked this one as the most infamous in this film. I don't know if it's Sally in the pickup truck that feels more iconic to me, or the grab behind that Leatherface does, but I'll take it. I love Texas Chainsaw. The film follows Sally and her friends who encounter a depraved family in rural Texas. Sally is captured and brought to their home, which leads to the dinner scene. Sally is bound in this scene and tormented by this insane family. She's surrounded by the grotesque Leatherface, his sadistic brother, Hitchhiker, and their seemingly frail, or let's be real, dust-like grandpa. And then the family try and get grandpa to hit her with an instrument, and he just has no strength in his arm. It's kind of slapstick in a way, but just the way they just keep mocking her and taunting her is really off-putting. I wouldn't say it's a shocking moment, but the atmosphere and the way it just does not let up is just relentless. It is a disturbing scene to watch in full. It goes on forever. Okay, next, Annihilation. the bear scene. I know a lot of you guys love this scene. This is directed by Alex Garland, and it's a visually stunning sci-fi horror that follows a group of scientists exploring a mysterious environment phenomenon known as the Shimmer. And although there are some very noteworthy, memorable scenes from this film, the bear had people shocked. After hearing horrifying guttural growls, the group discover a distorted bear that has been transformed by the Shimmer. Its body and biology altered. The real horror comes in when the bear opens its mouth, and you can tell it's in agony, but it mimics human screams, the sound of human screams. Shepherd is the character whose voice is distorted and echoed throughout the creature. The bear then attacks the group with brutal force, creating emotional and psychological impact as the creature's human-like cries resonate with the team. It's disturbing to hear one of their own within the bear, but also what this bear has become. It's a very good scene. Next is a very interesting film. This is the Yugoslavian war drama, Occupation in 26 Pictures. And the movie is about three friends who are living in pre-World War II Dubrovnik. But when it's occupied, their backgrounds force them to part ways. A lot happens in this movie, but in this scene in particular, the bus scene, a group of Jewish people and an Orthodox priest are put into a bus against their will. They are then driven out and ended in various ways. They are using force, they are using nails. It's insane. And they also open up the door, they throw one person down a cliffside, and there is a very aggressive SA scene for the woman on board. Another person becomes crownless, just completely split off. It's all round depravity. It's a brutal scene and it's just chaos. It all kind of happens at once quite quickly. It's probably up this high because it's not as graphic in texture as some of the other scenes we'll get into, but it is a very hard watch. And it's also one I hadn't seen before, so it got me out of my comfort zone. I wouldn't say it's one that is very infamous, especially connected to the rest of these movies, which are very mainstream kind of horrors, but I could understand why the person who made this Iceberg, they've probably seen the film and it's stuck in their mind forever, and I can totally understand that. It is a lot and it's quite realistic. Now I'm gonna say something really messed up, which I'm so mad that this is after the last scene. We're going to talk about Midsommar, and we're talking about the cliff moment, and this is fictional, okay? This is a fictional story, but I have to say this scene is not disturbing to me, and I know that's a very weird take. The drama is the story of Danny and a small group of outsiders that are invited to a remote part of Sweden for a Midsommar festival. Personally, I find the opening scene for this entire film definitely the most disturbing. I'm really surprised there's not more of Midsommar on this, but there is more of Hereditary. I find that first scene to be just, you can't come back from that. This scene is very different. This is during one of the rituals that this community has, where two of the oldest members of their cult are required, but it's their own doing, to end themselves in a ritual where they jump off cliffs. The thing is, the group that are brought in, they have no idea what they're getting themselves into, so they're just taken to this cliff and they just watch this event happen before them, which is completely horrific and so out of their comfort zone. As the man tries to end himself, it doesn't quite land the way it's supposed to, and so other members have to come over and end him with force. It's a pretty disgusting scene in that regard, don't get me wrong, but the ritual itself is quite interesting. I think that there's truly something very powerful in showing taboo rituals or beliefs and not censoring them to suit societal norms. And this is fiction, okay? We're talking about a fictional movie right now, okay? So back off. Okay, let's talk about Zombie 2, The Splinter, because this one is something else. There's so many eye scenes in this list. This Italian horror film follows a group of people who are stranded on a mysterious tropical island where they encounter zombies. It's known as the unofficial sequel to Dawn of the Dead, and Dawn of the Dead was titled Zombie in Italy, so that's why it's called Zombie 2. And one of the most infamous moments in the film is when a character comes face to face with one of the zombies, and in their struggle, she becomes wedged with no escape behind a door. Suddenly, we see a huge splinter in the door. It's not even a splinter, it's like a chunk of wood, and the zombie cannot quite get to her, so it just pulls her head closer and closer to the splinter, and then it comes all the way through. But the way it happens is so, not slow motion, but just really millimeter by millimeter, and she cannot move and she's kind of jammed there. So it's a very slow approach and you're waiting for something to happen to interfere to save her, and it doesn't. Who would have known a splinter would be the worst thing to happen to you when you're surrounded by zombies? Okay, here it is, Hereditary poll. We knew this was coming. This is the most infamous scene in Hereditary by far, and one of the most infamous scenes, at least in horror that year, but for recent horror, I would say modern times. This really shook an audience. During the film, Peter is forced to take his younger sister Charlie to a party. Charlie, who has a nut allergy, has an allergic reaction. She finds Peter, who takes her to the car and is trying to drive to the hospital. She's struggling to breathe, kind of clawing at her neck, and she sticks her head out the window, maybe hoping that she can get some air. And just as she's out there for a second, Peter sees something on the road and swerves. As he does so, she connects with a nearby pole, disconnecting her crown from her body. The most insane part of this is how Peter just keeps driving. He drives home, he gets into bed, and he goes to sleep. Just seeing him come to terms, or really not come to terms with what's just happened, is very alarming. No one knew this was going to happen when the film came out. The marketing and everything around this movie was so fantastic in the way that you had no idea what it was really about, and that just had all of everyone's theories go out the window. And then the last one on this tier is Fear Street's Bread Slicer. Fear Street is a trilogy that hit Netflix in 2021, and it's all based on the R.L. Stine's books, and it bridged a gap between horror fans who were watching a lot of films at home during that period and new horror fans, the teens. It's a young adult type story, but this scene just blew everyone away because they weren't expecting a young adult kind of teen slasher to go this hard, especially on Netflix. In this scene, a masked killer is battling kids in a grocery store. He grabs one of his victims and slams her body down next to a bread slicer, an industrial commercial grade electric bread slicer, very strong and big enough for her whole head. And that's exactly what happens as he feeds her in slowly. Again, another scene where you're expecting something to come in last minute and help her, and nothing comes, and she's just shredded, leaving horror fans cheering in their living rooms. And that is the end of tier 2. Starting off the next tier with a bit of a rough one. I hated rewatching this scene. This is Dr. Sleep. Oh, this is excruciating, and it's actually not graphic at all that much, I guess, compared to the rest of this list. Mike Flanagan, who directed Dr. Sleep, has such a talent for making scenes that are excruciating to watch because of the emotional distress, and we'll get to another film by him very soon. But this scene needs a little bit of context. The film is a sequel to The Shining, and it follows an evil group known as the True Knot. And they're described as vampires who torture those who possess the Shining. And they feed on this steam that they deploy. Basically, it's a soul feeder in the Shining universe. And in this scene, they capture a young boy who possesses the Shining. They pin him down to the ground. He screams out in agony, and maybe the worst part is he's screaming, and they are taunting him, telling him that they are gonna hurt him. And it is so hard to watch because, again, help is not coming. Spoiler alert, guys, help is not coming. They then use a sharp instrument on him, and you don't really see the impact, but you just hear his deafening screams as they end him slowly, sucking out the steam. The idea of someone so innocent, an innocent child, doing this and being in this situation, and a group of people actively preying on him together, it's awful. It's just an awful scene to watch. I think it's interesting that they said that this Iceberg was ranked by graphic content, because although it is a little graphic, there are some vital fluids at bay. The focus of this scene is his face, the boy's face, and then also the reverse shot of the perpetrators. When I was looking into this scene, I saw a lot of people saying that they couldn't watch it in full when they watched it at home, especially people who had children, and I can understand that. It's really distressing. But it's so wild, the next film that they've put directly after that, the Guinea Pig series. This is the eye in the first film from the series, called The Devil's Experiment. I've done a whole video on this series breaking down as I react and watch them all the way through. This whole film is just the idea of a woman who is kidnapped and tortured by a group of men. There is nothing else to it. They do experiment with different instruments on her, so it's a very drawn out, hard watch. But I do think that this film is pretty impressive for being 40 years old. And as the title says, you really don't need much context, but in this moment, I wouldn't even call it a scene. It happens quite quickly. They poke her eye with a very sharp instrument. And it's more so the angle, because it's a very creative way or technique that they use, which shows the entire eye. It's a very tight shot, and although it's quick, it does feel like it drags on forever. But I think it sticks in people's minds because of how detailed it is. Now we're getting into some interesting territory. We're going to talk about Irreversible. Heads up, I am a fan of Gaspar Noé, another person who I've done a whole video on every single one of his movies. I'm a big fan. I understand people having reservations about this film, and I have to explain it in context. I know that that sounds crazy, but you really have to understand how this film works to get any payoff from these situations. Film is the story of Alex, her boyfriend Marcus, and her ex-boyfriend Pierre, who spend the night out together in Paris. But the film is shown, as the title says, in reverse chronological order. So the film actually ends completely brutal, but you have to go all the way back, or really watch all the way forward, to understand why and how we got to that place. And I think a lot of people are put off by some of the scenes that are very famous, and we're not even talking about the famous scene just yet. We will get to it. I understand that. Everyone has a line, and I totally respect that. But you have to watch the whole film to see the effective parts. And I think people don't even get to the end, which is the start, to see the actual reveal. It starts so peaceful, and I just really adore this film. I know it's very messed up. I make disturbing videos for a reason, guys. So in this scene, we follow Marcus and Pierre, who are trying to track down a perpetrator who has done something horrific to Alex. They think they have found him, and one of them attacks him, and it gets very nasty and very intense quite quick. So the other one comes to save him and picks up a fire hydrant and whack-a-mole all the way down, all the way to pulp. The scene is intense for so many reasons, but like I said, you have to watch the whole film, because you realize later that that actually wasn't the perpetrator, and the perpetrator is watching in the background as this is happening to someone that he was with. And the way he looks, it's almost humorous to him that he isn't getting attacked and someone else is taking the fall for what he did. It's a gruesome scene, utterly gruesome, and it's a crazy way to start a movie. This is at the very start. The next one is so graphic in a different way, and I've seen the Audition so many times, and honestly, I had to rewatch at least this scene for this list, and I was gagging. I don't think I have a weak stomach, but there are a couple films on this list. Watching those scenes again just threw me, and this one was one. This movie has such a profound effect on audiences because it has this brooding tension with a slow burn start. It's about a widower who uses a fake screen test to audition women in secret to find a new wife. But as the film goes on, we realize that his prime target was not the best candidate. It's a story of karma. It's a good for her, not really, I don't know. The whole film is just chilling, utterly chilling, and this is a hard open, but basically in this scene, we watch her baby bird feed, yak might be the censored term, into a dog bowl and then bring it to a victim who is completely disfigured because of her doing. You don't see her do it, but you can hear her, and then you see her just bring in this beautiful bowl of gruel. It is so disgusting. It is awful, but it works really well in this film. You have to watch the whole movie to really get the full experience, but maybe you don't want to now. Next, we have Mirrors, which is an underappreciated 2000s horror. I love 2000s horror, and this scene is called Jaw. This is very fast and very effective. It is a remake of a South Korean film, and in this we watch Amy Smart, who is the target of a demon who is trapped within mirrors. She's in the bathroom and she walks towards the bath to get in, but as she passes the mirror, you see her reflection standing still, so you're aware at this point that the demon has locked into the next target. And here, with some pretty gnarly CGI that I think still holds up really well, which is probably why it's on this list, her mirror self separates her face from her jaw and just pulls. And her in the bath has this spitting image, or should you say splitting image, of what this demon is doing. It's fast, it's effective, and it makes horror fans giddy. Unlike the last movie we were just talking about, this is one of those fun moments, which is so sick to say. Okay, Terrifier 2, mashed potatoes. I can't show you anything that happens in the scene for very good reason, but this is the face of the guy who was watching it, so use your imagination. As you may know or may not know, Terrifier isn't the most logical series. This entity called Art the Clown is going around terrorizing people. That's basically it. In this part of the film, we watch as young Jonathan has an anxiety attack when Art enters the dining room with a bell to signify it's dinner time, and he goes over to a victim that is sitting at the dinner table and puts down his dish of mashed potato. But this victim doesn't have anything on their crown, and when he puts the dish in front of what is left of this victim, the victim obviously does not react, especially in the way that Art wants him to. So in a fit of rage, he starts picking up the mashed potato and putting it where their face would be, just shoving it in there. The positive to Terrifier is it is very practical and it is very textured in this moment. Art is very much a physical comedy clown. Next, we've got another Mike Flanagan, and this one is Handcuff, and I actually did a cosplay as this whole thing, this whole scene for the Halloween, I think, that this movie came out. It is based on a Stephen King book. The whole film, or majority of the film, is based in one room where a woman is handcuffed in place and no one knows where she is. And it's all brought together by this climax where you realize she just needs to do something to get out of the room. And the way she is handcuffed, she figures out a plan where she must use a glass of water next to her and get a sharp part of that and use it against herself for vital fluid to use as a lubricant. But it's not pretty and it's not clean. It's actually called the degloving scene by a lot of people because it looks like her hand is like a glove. There's separation. It very much gives 127 hours when you see someone stuck somewhere and you're like, you're gonna have to do that thing. It's almost like Saw, you know, the end of Saw, but it's very effective and very well done. The Thing Dogs gets all the way down here, and I wonder if it is because of how distressing it is to see the dogs in this situation. So I'm sorry, there are chapters here if you do want to skip past this one, I understand. I believe this is the dog kennel scene, it has to be. Some context in this is a Norwegian sled dog has just arrived to an American research station in Antarctica. And in this scene, the dog enters the kennel that is full of other dogs for the first time. But the dogs sense something is wrong and begin to bark in defense. Then the dog suddenly transforms into a shape-shifting creature. And it begins to kind of absorb the other dogs and merges them into this monstrous being, the Thing. Some of the dogs attempt to escape. They're trying to bite through the cage. It takes some victims. It is pretty graphic and all practical. Some of the animals do escape and people come to see what the commotion is, and that's when they use fire on the creature. And it really does take the film from 0 to 100 quite fast. Again, all practical elements, so it is very effective. We've gone from a very effective, fun, practical scene where no animals were harmed to something that is so disturbing emotionally and not too graphic. It's interesting how they can hit you in different ways, and that is exactly what happens in Eden Lake. And this is the end scene, so you'll need some context. This is one of those moments in cinema that makes your heart drop into your butt. Again, you'll have to watch the whole film to have the full effect with knowing what the characters went through. But basically, it's about a couple who plan a romantic weekend away at a remote lake house, but they are terrorized by a gang of youths. After unspeakable horror, which I will not explain all of it, but it is just relentless. Finally, Jenny, who is part of the couple, she gets away and she makes her way to this house, this residence, which is having a party, but she ends up collapsing from exhaustion there. And when she comes to, she is being comforted by this woman. But putting all the pieces together with the clues that she's picked up along the way, including a dog that enters the house as she's laying there, she realizes that she is in the perpetrator's house, or one of the perpetrators, who has been terrorizing her and her partner this entire film. She thought she was safe, and now she realizes she's literally in the devil's den. Thinking quickly, she asks to use the bathroom to make up a plan. In there, she tries to arm herself, but it is too late. At first, you wonder if these people are still going to save her, and then the reality comes in. They really can't let her go on, because otherwise that means the end for their son. He will obviously end up in jail from the things that have happened. By now, the boy's in the house and they realize who she is, and they're trying to get in the bathroom. They're screaming at her, and they send the boy to his bedroom and they viciously attack her. And what is so damning is not what you see, it's just what you hear. Again, the screams. And it also ends on this chilling scene where he is just looking at himself in the mirror and he deletes all of the evidence from everything that's happened that weekend. It's one of those moments where you think she's a final girl, and she's definitely not. From the end to the start, ghost ship Cord. It's set in 1962, and we watch the guests of a ocean liner dance and celebrate the night when suddenly a metal wire snaps, splitting the entire room in half. So what you see here happens to everything and everyone there. The reveal is so excellent in this movie because the wire kind of springs boing to the tension. The tension stops it, and you can just see some vital fluid dripping. And then slowly every single person there separates, and some of them are aware of what's happening as it's happening, and it's the shock and silence of it all. And we watch a young Emily Browning who was in the middle of the scene. She was too short to be affected, and she just watches in horror as the sole survivor. I will say the rest of this film isn't great, but this scene is worth it for that effect alone. Okay, another fun one is Final Destination tanning bed. You guys already know, if you're a Final Destination fan, this is one of the most beloved, which is so sick to say, one of the most beloved fate coming to get you scenes. I will say it's a very outdated stereotype, but it is still a lot of fun. As we know, we've talked about Final Destination already. For people who escape the initial scene in all of the Final Destination movies, if they escape what the premonition was meant to be, then fate will come back and try and get them in any way possible. In this scene, Ashley and Ashlyn go to the tanning salon together, and they're using two beds that are in the same room. Ashley sets her iced drink on a table, and then Ashlyn cranks up the heat and she says a few degrees won't hurt, and she could not be more wrong. Ashley browses through CDs on a shelf on the wall, and a slight misstep loosens it from the wall, and then the condensation from Ashley's drink drips onto the machine below, sending it into overdrive. A coat rack falls and basically pushes this shelf off the wall and seals them both inside their separate tanning beds. They are screaming for help. The machines are kicking into overdrive. Those few degrees did hurt. Their skin blisters before the remaining bulbs set aflame. What I really like about this scene, I know that sounds so sick to say, it's fiction. What I like about this scene is the transition at the end, because we go to the two tanning beds to the two coffins. Very clever. Your next is a wicked slasher with a difference, and Erin is our final girl in this. She is fantastic. This is a self-contained scene, so I don't have to spoil anything, which is great. The name though is so funny, because if I said a blender scene in a slasher, I don't think you'd be able to predict what happens. So in this scene, she is having two people attack her, and she grabs a blender off the shelf of the kitchen where she is fighting them, and she smashes it and then turns it blender down, upside down basically, and shoves it onto the man's crown. She then plugs it in and lets it rip. It's just very resourceful. Another Final Destination scene, this one is the pool drain, and it really runs with the idea of a freak accident. Because what could be threatening about a pool? Well, in Final Destination, fate always finds a way, and it's Hunt's turn, who is chilling by a country club pool when the drain cover happens to come off. So when a golf ball hits him by mistake and he drops a coin into the pool, he naturally dives in to get it, but he goes too close to the drain and the force sucks him down. So while he's sitting there trying to get out, trying to flag help, and struggling to breathe, he's also blocking the drainage system, which again is kicked into overdrive, and it uses pressure to try and relieve whatever is blocking it, and that happens to suck his insides out, exploding everywhere. I love Final Destination because sometimes you can't predict how these freak accidents are going to happen, and that one really kept me guessing. Okay, we're back to Pet Sematary, and I promise I won't ramble this time. This is the kite scene. It's the infamous scene. It's the scene in the movie that really changes everything. This moment takes place when the family are with Judd, who is their neighbor, and they are enjoying kind of like a picnic or just some time outside together in the front yard, which happens to have this huge road or bypass running through the front of it. And they have a lot of trucks that use this road. Judd has warned them about it. But they're flying a kite together and they're taking turns, and their little son, he grabs the kite and he's playing with it, but then he accidentally drops it and he starts chasing after the string. And the family are joking, they're talking, they don't realize until it's too late that there is a truck coming by the road. It is way far out, but as he's running, it's all coming together in almost slow motion. The father makes a run for it, and the mother is just screaming, "Get the baby, get the baby." And the father falls and stumbles and doesn't make it quite to the road, but unfortunately his son does. And there's a huge accident, and what we see is his little tiny shoe just laying on the road. It's not a graphic scene, so again, I don't know why this is really sorted by graphic content, but it's an emotionally distressing scene. If this was emotionally distressing, I probably would say half of these films are emotionally distressing for me, but I could understand why it's this far down. Because the next scene doesn't seem like it's in the same category or universe. This is Hostel, Globe, Luxation. I had to look up what that meant because I wasn't too sure what they were referring to, and I'm very regretful of looking at Google Images. Don't do it. But it is the correct term for it. I would probably call it the eye scene. Everyone knows the eye scene in Hostel. The movie is about backpackers who are lured into a trap where we watch people pay to use them as they please. They're set up in their own room with their own instruments to do what they please and basically have their own little game of Saw. In this scene, our protagonist, who is a victim, has got free, and he enters a room where a woman is getting messed with. He goes to free her, but then there's a reveal that her eye is protruding out of her face, and now he needs to use some instruments to cut her to a condition where she can get away. She's basically screaming at him in a different language, and he can't understand. So he relieves the pressure, and a lot of fluids are everywhere, pulsating. If you've seen the movie, you'll never forget this scene. But next we have The Blob, and this is the 1988 version. There is a lot that happens in the sewers, but one of the most famous is the climax where a group of survivors find themselves in the sewers face to face with the Blob, which is a government experiment gone wrong. It's a mass that is growing at an alarming rate, and any victims that happen to fall in its way, it consumes them and just continues to grow. And this scene we watch as a group struggle to get up a ladder to safety, but the Blob grabs one of them, engulfing their body within seconds. His screams are muffled as it dissolves him, and it shows his ghastly face. It almost looks like he's jumping back out, like, again, Jason from Friday the 13th. I don't know why they don't have the Friday the 13th on this Iceberg either. That's a pretty infamous scene. Actually, there's no Freddy either. I'm not sure if this is the most infamous scene from this movie. I wasn't really around when it first came out and everyone was talking about it. I find the scenes to be more impactful where they actually show the figure and the stretching of the faces within the mass, but that's just me. We have another Hostel for the end of this tier, and this is the scene everyone talks about. Just saying the name, Achilles tendon. It's awful. You can just feel the pain in this scene, and the reveal and the way it happens is very smart. As I said earlier, they lure backpackers into this situation, and Josh comes face to face with his perpetrator. He actually saw him earlier in the film in the wild, in public. So it is a reveal that he is in the situation for us, the viewer, and that the person who's doing it to him, he kind of knows. There's reveals of instruments in the room, and he is just going to town on poor Josh in different ways. He takes a seat and really does get face to face level with him and has a conversation with him that is just chilling. Josh is screaming at him, wondering why he's doing this, and this guy, he tells the story of his motive and how he wanted to be a surgeon, and he asks Josh if he knows why he couldn't be a surgeon. And then he holds up his hand and you can see he has tremors. So it was his way of performing surgery. I don't know if it's sicker when you know the motive or not. Josh is pleading for him to go, and then the guy says, "You want to go?" And he goes down out of frame, and you just hear Josh start screaming. And then he unties Josh and he goes to the front door and he opens it. And at this moment you realize he's cueing Josh. If he wants to leave, he can leave freely. He's just got to get to that door. And what do you know, when Josh gets up, crack, he falls straight on his face because the name has been cut. I don't know what that feels like. I don't want to know what that feels like, but I can feel it, you know? It's so subtle and fast, but the scene is definitely, for me, the most infamous in the Hostel series. Okay, tier 4, and you guys know I love a good saw trap. This one is called The Rack, and a lot of people really hold this one to high regards. I wouldn't say it's my favorite. Again, I need to really look through all of the saw traps and find a favorite. You know what Saw's about by now, and in this one we watch Timothy, who has become a part of someone else's puzzle. It's revealed by Jigsaw's voice that Timothy had an accident with Jeff's son Dylan, who was 8 years old and unfortunately passed away from this incident. Now Jeff has to put himself on the line because, you know, it wasn't enough that his son was taken. He needs to put himself on the line and decide whether he is going to get some kind of revenge for what happened to his son by watching Timothy on the rack, or he can put his hand into a device and grab a key, but it will set off a instrument that would put a slug, are you getting what I'm saying, into him. The rack is this huge device that is pinning him up, almost like a crucifixion, and it twists in unnatural ways that your body shouldn't go. The thing is, there's a third person in the room with them who is a judge. And as the rack begins to do its own thing and things are twisting ways they shouldn't go, the judge is freaking out and trying to get Jeff to react and make a decision. Timothy is screaming. It's doing the Saw editing thing where it's jumping back and forth and the anxiety is just pounding. And Jeff decides he's going to be real clever and try and outsmart Jigsaw, and he tries to untie the key that is attached to an instrument. And while doing this, the instrument goes off anyway, and it flies by Jeff and lands in the judge. It's too late for Timothy anyway at this point because he is doing a Reagan from The Exorcist and, you know, what owls do, and it's all over. So this leaves Jeff in the room with two people that he has now put in this situation. I mean, he hasn't, Jigsaw has. But I can't even imagine, especially after losing your son. I don't know why Jigsaw... Okay, whatever. I'm not trying to figure out the motives of Jigsaw today. Next, we have another guinea pig, Japanese guinea pig film. This one is from The Flower of Flesh and Blood, and it is based on manga by the director. And again, in this movie, it sounds very similar to the last one, but it is a little bit different. We have one man who kidnaps a woman and he separates all of her, and it's done piece by piece. She's completely out of it. She's got substances and she's just laying there while she is separated with sharp proficiency. This film in particular has sparked some controversy because this is the one that people rumor, it's a rumor, but it's alleged that Charlie Sheen thought this was real. I'm sure you've heard of that rumor. And then also there's alleged to be a copycat crime that took place that mirrored what happened in this scene or movie. It's really a whole movie. It's not really a scene. That is the whole film. She is in pieces and there is vital fluid everywhere. The next one, we're back to Saw. This is Saw 3D Furnace. They probably should have named this one, not to be that person, but they probably should have named this one Brazen Bull, which it's known for. The trap's named that because in Saw 2, there is a furnace scene that is regarded as the furnace trap. So I assume that this one is meant to mean the Brazen Bull one. This scene has two people, the person who needs to do the thing to themselves to let the other person free, and of course just the direct victim, and that victim is standing on a metal platform and they are slowly lowered down into this intricate constructed trap that is a dome-like oven. And then across from the platform, the other person is left with this pulley system made of hooks, and basically they need to use those like a fish on themselves to pull out pieces that would stop the other person from being lowered into this oven. Unfortunately, they fail and the person is lowered in and the flames are put on. To add another layer, the victim in this one who ends up in flames, she is the wife of the person across the room who was meant to help her, and she was also completely innocent and only there because of something that her husband did. Jigsaw at his finest. Okay, next one, the Green Inferno. You know we're getting bad. The Green Inferno. There are so many scenes from this movie that I could put on this list. This one is titled Cut Apart, and I hope I got the right one. There's a lot of crazy scenes in this movie. One being the poop scene, but I'm pretty confident that this would definitely be what they're talking about. The movie is heavily inspired by the cannibal Holocaust, and it follows a group of activists who travel to the Amazon to try and save a rainforest, but the locals do not take kindly to them. This scene takes place during the meeting of the locals, where they instantly end one of the activists, and then they pull Jonah, one of their group, they pull him away from the rest. They cage the other people, and Jonah is taken over to the side. The people in the cage can see him. He is fed something, some liquids, and then he is laid down and basically pinned there. And then what we can figure is one of the tribe leaders comes over to Jonah and uses a very sharp tool and starts to take apart things from within him and feed it to his local people. It is a very detailed scene. And do you know the song? Head, shoulders, knees and toes, and eyes and ears and mouth and nose. Head, shoulders, knees and toes. That applies to this film in so many ways. Eli Roth was looking for some controversy with this movie and he got it. Next, short and simple, Terrifier is back. This is the first Terrifier film, at least. Not the first time Art has appeared, but the first Terrifier film. This scene really threw people because they did not know that the movie was about to go that hard. And before this, he was kind of like this menacing clown, and this really showed us. I'm gonna have to describe this, but basically someone is put upside down with their legs apart, and an instrument is used to start at their pelvis and go all the way down. We do have another animal one. Again, very interesting that this is put into the mix. This is from Fear, which is a stalker movie. I love stalker movies from the 90s. This one starring Mark Wahlberg and Reese Witherspoon, and it's a film about an abusive relationship where we follow David and Nicole, and it turns sinister when David lets out his darker side. The doggy door scene takes place at Nicole's family house, where her family are kind of gathering around her. They're trying to figure out what to do, and they have intruders trying to get in their house. We're sitting in the kitchen, and when we hear the doggy door kind of flap, we're thinking, oh God, the dog's coming back in. Thank God, because there are intruders. This is not a good situation. And her little brother goes to grab the dog, basically, this German Shepherd. But unfortunately, it's not the dog. It's part of the dog. It's the crown of the dog, but not the rest of the dog. The way they move it is like they're mimicking the dog coming through the door, but there's nothing to follow. So it's very menacing and horrendous, very violent. Terrifier 2 Home Invasion. I'm glad they put this the furthest down for Terrifier, because this is the scene for me that pushed it so far beyond. I believe this is the scene with Allie, because that would make sense as the home invasion. It's also referred to as the bedroom scene, and it is one of the most, if not long-winded, scenes in all of the films, and definitely the most brutal, I think. Like I said, it doesn't need much context. There's no rhyme or reason to what Art does. And in this movie, Allie comes down to her kitchen to find that Art has broken in. He's drinking a glass of water from her tap, like he's just parched when he's woken up from his slumber, but he has broken in. He then chases her upstairs, where he brutalizes her on the bed. He has his own tools, and he begins to take away pieces, including her, that's like a wig almost, the way it separates. He checks her flexibility as he bends things the wrong way, completely snapping them, and it just keeps going. It goes for so long, and just when you think he's kind of left her to end, he comes back and pours salt on everything he's just done, rubbing it in. The scene only ends when the mother finally comes to the door and sees what's left of her daughter, and it is horrific. It is by far the hardest scene, I think, to watch in all of the Terrifier films. I honestly don't think anything in Terrifier 3 came close to that scene. Okay, we're there. You guys ready for the next one? Pink Flamingos. If you haven't heard of this film, I don't know what percentage of people are just watching this because they like this kind of stuff and what percentage of people are watching it because they don't know some of these scenes. Prepare yourself. Actually, this is the one. This is the one that made me feel really rotten watching it back. But there is a good reason for it, and I have seen this film a couple of times in totality, but there's something about just watching this part, rewatching this part, that really got me this time. I think I'm getting a weaker stomach the older I get. But I will say, even though this is the most controversial part of Pink Flamingos, I don't think it's the worst scene by any means. I think that goes to the chicken scene, which is not on this list. But I know why this is on the list, because it is more infamous. Pink Flamingos is a bizarre black comedy by John Waters, and we follow Divine, who is trying to outdo a couple to win the title of the filthiest person alive. This film is insane for so many reasons, but she decides to cement her title at the very end of the movie by going up to a dog, and in a scene that is not cut, it's one take, you see the dog do its business, and she just leans down and consumes. It's all real. And that's why they kept it as one take, so you could see the life cycle. The worst part is she moves it around her teeth. She's also having trouble with it. You can see it's not like she's smiling the whole time. She's really trying to get through it. And afterwards, she actually called the hospital and claimed that someone's child had done that and asked if there was any health concerns. And the person who she spoke to said, don't worry, it happens all the time. Okay, next, Bone Tomahawk, and this is the wishbone scene. A lot of people believe that this is what inspired the hacksaw scene in Terrifier. The film is about a small town sheriff who teams up with locals to rescue several townspeople from a cannibalistic tribe. And in this part of the film, the main characters are confined to a prison cell where we watch this scene take place from their point of view from behind the bars. They take one of the townspeople, Nick, and in front of them, they remove the top like it's a wig again. I can't believe we've said that twice in like 10 minutes. And then they put that in his mouth, and again, they wishbone him. So they turn him upside down and they separate him from pelvis all the way down. This one's a little bit different, the way it falls. A little bit more realistic, to be honest. And you're kind of just watching behind the bars, almost like the shot in the Green Inferno where they're behind the bars again. They're in the cage watching their friend and everything happen to them. So you're feeling very helpless. It is a very effective scene. This movie is super graphic. I love when films surprise us, especially a very effective remake. And the Suspiria remake is something else. I don't think anyone expected it to turn out quite the way it did for so many reasons, but the pretzel scene had people talking, people gasping. The movie is about Susie, who arrives at a dance academy in 1977 Berlin, unaware that it's run by a coven of witches. But she impresses them and she secures a spot in the lead performance. And in this scene, she is rehearsing for her lead position, but we have this juxtaposition where it cuts back and forth between her dance and something that's happening to a character called Olga. Olga has tried to get help and try to let people know what is happening within this academy, what's really happening, and so she must be punished. So while Susie is dancing, her moves become quite violent, and this is replicated in Olga, who becomes trapped in a mirror dance studio, and her body starts mimicking what is happening with Susie, but at a much more violent rate. Basically, the title says it all. Her body bends, snaps, breaks. You can hear everything and you can see everything. It is very impressive, and there's this ambient droning kind of music in the background and just the cracks, and she's left in this almost puddle of what she was, like a pretzel, just drooling. Okay, one of my favorite horror movies of all time, Martyrs. I don't know what is the most infamous scene. I guess it is this one. I think the bathroom scene is pretty gnarly as well, but I'll take this one. Again, this is kind of like Eden Lake, a lot of films here that rely a lot on you knowing the full story to get the full effect, because this is the end of the film. Full spoilers on the film. The movie basically starts off in a completely different place, but ends up leading one of the main characters into a trap of a secret society that tries to push individuals to the edge to attempt to create martyrs who will transcend suffering and gain insight into the afterlife. They have pushed her to the very edge, trying to see what God will tell them. And in this scene, she is stripped, and like a fish, everything is removed except for her face. And it's like one layer is left, a very rosy layer. It's like an educational chart where you can see the layers, what's beneath the surface. And she gives them the signal that she has reached the point by something that is on her face that they talk about earlier in the film, but they're able to see that she is where they wanted her to go. And the head of this organization approaches her, and there are words exchanged. Basically, the victim is telling her the answer, God's whisper. But after she hears this, which we don't hear as the audience, this head of the society, she goes and she ends herself. The film is so effective, and just how it ends opens up so many conversations. The reason this film is so effective is because it traumatizes you on so many levels through its graphics, but then also emotionally. There's just a lot going on, and it's a lot to take in. Such a funny film to come after this. I know that they're all put in the same category together, but I do take it as each one is a step down within that tier. And Re-Animator Head is such a funny film to put after the last one. It's so goofy and silly, and it's meant to be fun. The body horror comedy is about a rogue medical student who obsessively experiments with reanimating tissue, and he drags his reluctant roommate into a series of increasingly unhinged experiments. There are a lot of crown scenes in this film because it becomes a very iconic look for one of the main characters, but I believe this is probably the scene explaining how that happens. So in this scene, Herbert is with Dr. Carl, and Dr. Carl is looking through a microscope, and then Herbert takes a shovel and he then puts Dr. Carl's crown into a tray and uses his Re-Animator fluid, which the whole film is based on. The doctor reanimates, and he is able to walk around with his body holding his crown at the same time. It's a new look for him. I think it's quite comedic though, because he's walking around this facility holding it, and he's trying to move it so he can see certain things, but he's also talking in this kind of raspy whisper because I guess he's missing his pipe. So it's a very interesting approach. Okay, we're getting to the bottom, guys. We're getting there. Tier 5, the sadness. If you've seen any scene from this film, you'll know why it's on this iceberg. For the graphic content, at least. I don't know what I would have chosen from this film. Maybe a scene from within the restaurant. But the movie is just stained with vital fluid from start to end. This is a Taiwanese film from 2021, and it's utterly insane. The story is about a couple who try to reunite after a plague takes over a city, turning everyone into deranged sadists. It's inspired by the comic series Crossed. It is a feast for people who enjoy graphic content, but also they say like 99% of this is practical effects, and they have gone today with eye hole. This actually happens pretty early in the film. This is the part of the sequence where we first see the scale of the spread, and it happens on the train. Suddenly everyone starts to attack each other, and there's so much going on. You're not even able to take in everything that happens in this scene. There are layers upon layers, so many people, so many incidents. But this is very simple because while this chaos is happening, a girl is sitting on the train and an older man approaches her, and he has an umbrella and he just decides to stick straight in there. It's disgusting, and it's exactly what you expect, but it's very straightforward. And this film does not let up, not once. So I don't know how you would even narrow it down to one scene being so infamous. Okay, here it is, the one I've been dreading talking about, a Serbian film. This is the first appearance of this film on the iceberg, but I'm telling you, it is not the last. So we're gonna have to explain a couple of things for context now that you're going to have to put a pin in it for the next little bit, and there's not much left. The 2010 film is about an aging adult star called Milos who agrees to participate in one final film to set up him and his family before finally retiring. He believes he's going to be in an art film, but what it ends up being is one of the worst things ever recorded. There are a couple things that are important for context. He has a brother called Marcus who is a corrupt cop, and they hate each other, or Marcus really doesn't like him, and Marcus has a thing for his wife. And just keep in mind, Milos has a wife and a son. But in this scene, Milos wakes up and realizes that he has just been on forced substances, and he finds a videotape of himself, which he watches back, and in this videotape, he is SAing a woman very brutally, and then he's handed an instrument, which is the name of this scene, and he removes her crown, and he keeps going what he's doing with her, the SA, until he's pulled off her. Okay, next. The next scene is the remake of the 1972 film The Last House on the Left. This is 2009, and it's simply called the wood scene, but I think it's very much known as the SA scene. We're almost at the end, so please keep in mind that it's going to be very brutal from here on. The film is a revenge story about two girls, Paige and Mari, who are kidnapped by a group of criminals, and then the parents of one of the girls seek revenge. This scene takes place in the woods when the girls have tried to escape this group. Paige is tied and put on the ground, and she watches Mari be assaulted. Paige insults them, which leads to them changing their focus to Paige and ending her. Mari is then pinned down, assaulted further in a very graphic scene, but she manages to get away, and she tries to escape through the woods, finds a lake and jumps in there, where they use an instrument that they can use from afar to harm her. It is an awful scene. It makes me never want to watch any of those kinds of films again, but I do think the scene in the original film was more infamous than this one. Speaking of, we have another remake, and this is completely flipped for me because I do think that this remake somehow is more aggressive and covers the point and the topic a lot better. I know that's a weird thing to say. I'm sure a lot of people are huge Wes Craven fans, which I am too. But if you watch the remake of The Hills Have Eyes compared to the original, which I've done very recently, I watched them back to back, this one is so much more brutal. The film tells the story of a family while driving through the desert in New Mexico take a shortcut that leads them into the clutches of a group of mutant cannibals. This particular scene, I understand why it's there, but it is so hard to describe because it happens really, really fast. The family have been split up by the group as an attempt to remove them and start to prey on them. And during this time, two women are left in the caravan home with a baby. Now, two of the hill people enter the caravan and they snatch the baby, and they start to use an instrument to kind of threaten its life to make the other women work with them. And in a series of really quick shots, they assault one of the women, and another family member attempts to intervene, and they end her instantly. Then the woman who is assaulted, SA'd, in this very suggestive scene, she is also ended point blank, and they escape with the baby. When you watch this scene back, it happens so fast, but I remember the first time I ever saw this, I felt like it went on forever. Everyone was talking about this scene, which is exactly why it's here on this iceberg. But when you go back and watch it, it is fast. Everything happens so quick that you don't even have a second to grasp what is happening. And I'm sure that's for the victims as well. They don't have a sense of how to get out of this situation before it's over. It is very startling, and I know it's traumatized so many people. We have another French film. This is Inside. And this movie is a crazy game of cat and mouse, mostly mouse, and it is just covered in vital fluids. It's just painted from start to end. The movie is about what we think is a stranger who is attacking a woman who is pregnant in her own home. She shows up one night while she's home alone and threatens to take this package from her directly. And as the name suggests, she's like running around with a very sharp object, and she catches her almost in this moment, but then she starts going into labor, and is obviously from the shock and the panic of it all, from the stress. And so she decides that she's going to help her change her delivery type. Very crude. And she does so. You see everything. You see absolutely everything as she... The texture is something else. And this woman really puts up a fight. You need to watch this movie if you haven't. It is mind-blowing. I can't believe this is the only time they've mentioned human centipede in this whole video, which is crazy. And it's from the second one, which I will agree is maybe the worst. I think so. The third one does have a scene that is a lot, but I don't think a lot of people watched to that point like I did. I've interviewed Harvey, who plays the villain in this second film. He's a very sweet guy. The second film is very much inspired by the first. So it is about this new villain who has watched the first Human Centipede movie and wants to try to make an experiment of their own. I don't think I have to explain what the Human Centipede is. I hope I don't. Mouth to butt, okay? Mouth to butt. I believe this has to be the scene that they're talking about, the escape scene. It is the most brutal for sure, because we've got yet another pregnant lady. During the film, she's kind of tossed to the side as he's making his experiment. And when she finally comes to, she gets up to escape. She runs and she tries to find a car to get into. She's screaming, flailing, and from all of the stress, she goes into labor. And she does this as she's kind of getting into a car. And so it falls at her feet. And unfortunately, she's in a panic trying to get out of the situation, and she hits the accelerator, which it happens to be under. You hear sounds. I don't know how they were able to tie that kind of scene into this horrific situation, but they found a way. It is a complete accident, and it is completely traumatizing. I have no idea how to give context to this next film, so you're just gonna have to stay with me. And of course, it's another scene. They put them all in a row. I'm gonna call it a package just because it's fake and it's not real, okay? And it's gonna be easier that way for everybody. The movie is a layered, metaphorical film that evolves at a rapid pace, literally. It doesn't make sense even when you're watching it and have the context. It's a film you really have to think about and dive into biblical context. But just know that mother, Jennifer Lawrence, has just woken up and her baby is missing. Her partner, known as him, has given it to a crowd that is in their house. And the baby starts moving and being carried by this crowd, and she is screaming for the baby. And then again, a sound is used to signify that the baby has ended. The crying of the baby stops immediately, and as she enters the room where it's kind of happened, she finds an altar with the remains, and everyone around is eating what is left over. And in a struggle, she tries to grab back these pieces. Jennifer Lawrence has said that she never wants to do a film that made her feel the way that she felt while filming this. Again, even though she was dating the director, Darren Aronofsky, at the time, she said it's one of the worst experiences, traumatized her from inside out. And if you're a fan of dark cinema, you have to watch this film at least once. It's very important. We are on the last tier. Can you believe it? I have been places today I never want to go back to. Thank you for coming with me on this journey. If you have liked it so far, please give it a thumbs up, and it would really help if you shared it with some kind of community that is also as sick as us. We're going to talk about High Tension now. And this scene happens at the very start of the film, so you don't need any context. Here we see a truck that is parked on a dirt road next to a farm, and there is simulation of activity happening within this truck. We can hear sounds, we can hear moans, we can see the truck kind of shaking. So we think we know what's happening, and we can make out the silhouette kind of a man sitting there and something happening, you know, down yonder. But then it is revealed to us that not everything is as it seems, as the truck driver puts his hand out the window and drops a crown, just the crown that he was using for that. Yeah, for that. I have no words. I may not have many words left, but I'm gonna have to find them because this next one is gonna be challenging. I actually think this might be the worst of the bunch. I can't tell you how upset I was when I realized I had to watch the sequel to August Underground. This is a torture exploitation series packed with just depravity from start to end. This sequel is a found footage film which follows a gaggle of weirdos, beyond weirdos. That was a really nice way of describing them. Too nice. We're the weirdos. I don't know what they are. It's Peter, his girlfriend Krusty, and then his brother Maggot. The film is filled with the worst images you could ever think of, and it is all topped off by this scene where we watch Krusty watching Maggot in the bathtub essaying a person who has already ended, a victim they ended earlier. It is absolutely vile, but the movie starts with this scene with glass, and from that moment I emotionally had to check out. I don't know how any scene in this movie can be infamous because the whole thing keeps the same energy. That I will give it credit for? No, I will not give it any credit. Okay, let's get all of the smut out of the way, I guess. We've got Tumbling Doll of Flesh. This is a Japanese splatter horror film. The story follows a woman who is hired for a homemade adult film. So we see it through kind of that perspective in terms of its quality. And it turns into something more sinister. Perhaps it inspired a Serbian film. Unfortunately, all of the SA elements to this film, those scenes are very realistic. It is awful. It's excruciating to watch. I don't find the graphic elements outside of that to be that bad because they're pretty simple and you can see exactly how they do it in this movie. They're not very effective at all. After some very intense scenes, this woman comes to and realizes that her foot has been removed. We watch it as a block kind of is put underneath and then a sharp instrument separates it. She screams in agony, so they try and make her quiet and they try to remove her tongue. And they do so using different instruments, including a potato peeler, but what ends up working in the end is someone biting down on it and removing it that way. That's the scene. I would not recommend. Okay, this might be the worst actually. I hate that I watched this film. I watched this film just for this list because I had not seen it. I've never had so much regret in my life. And it was this far down that I realized I was in trouble. The Green Elephant is an exploitation movie that is labeled as a comedy horror, which is absolutely wild to me. The movie starts in a military prison and we watch via a handheld camera, which is set down and picked up throughout the film, as two prisoners locked together spiral into insanity. The film is centered around one of the prisoners' incoherent ramblings, I would say, and the idea that those ramblings are what sets the other prisoner off eventually. I wouldn't say it's very straightforward or very well designed by any means, but that's the idea of the film, and I think that's where they're meant to be getting the comedy out of it. I do not find this funny at all. I totally forgot this is also another movie that made me wanna yak because it has a scene that really gives Divine a run for her money. It's disgusting. Oh my god, I can't believe they didn't choose that scene because that goes on forever. Oh my god, I need to stop thinking about it. They chose a different scene. The scene that they've chosen kind of comes out of seemingly nowhere, where the prisoner who has been pushed to the edge by the other prisoner with the incoherent ramblings starts to tear apart a captain who is with them in this scene. First he SAs him, and then he just uses this sharp instrument and just starts. It's done in a way that they had to have used an animal, probably from The Butcher. They do this in a lot of movies. It's just very realistic, and for how low budget this film is, those elements must be real. Just the way they look very realistic. He's also naked as he's doing this to the other person, and it's just everywhere. There's things flying everywhere. There's things in your face. There's a lot that I just didn't need to see. Everything is wet and there's a backing track that is played in reverse. It's just overwhelming in so many different ways. But then it ends with him taking part of what is left and forcing the other prisoner who kind of pushed him to this insanity to suck on it and make it look like he's doing a crude act. I hate everything about this. It was awful. It was so bad to watch. But we've only got 3 left, and I know why this scene is all the way towards the bottom. It's finally time to talk about the Irreversible underpass scene, and I am in agreement that this scene shouldn't be what it is. It is so hard to watch. I understand how it fits into the film, but I don't think it should exist in the way it does. I completely understand that, especially because it stops people from watching what is otherwise an amazing movie. In this scene, we watch Alex, who we spoke about earlier. she has left a party and she walks to this underpass area, and here she sees another person being attacked. That attacker, that perpetrator, then turns her focus to Alex, and in a really horrific 9-minute sequence, we watch her be brutalized through SA. It is so long and so awful. The actress has admitted that she's never been able to watch the scene in its totality, and 200 people, they reported 200 people walked out of its premiere. I mean, 9 minutes is insane. The last two scenes are from the same film. Let's get to it. I've dreaded this part of the video. This, again, I think is the most infamous scene. And the next scene we're going to talk about afterwards, I don't think people even get to that part of the movie because this scene is in their way, stopping them from watching the movie at all. This part of the movie takes place when Milos meets the director of this art house film earlier than the last scene we talked about, where he finds out that he has taken substances and they're doing all these things to affect what he does. This is when he realizes that the director is completely unhinged, and the director shows him a scene. So we're watching him watch a scene where a woman gives birth, and then that's taken and used in a adult scene. That's all I can say. And Milos, he understandably storms out completely disgusted. But let's talk about the final scene of the movie. And I don't really know how to talk about this without talking about how it leads into it, because this is the ending, the damning ending of the whole film. And like I said, not many people get to this part because there's so many obstacles and hard to watch scenes in the way. And I have to give context to the very ending of the film. So I'm going to tell you about the scene that happens just before this. I really don't think that this is a scene in the movie. This is just a whole act, the final act of the film. The ending doesn't make sense unless you understand what happened just before. So just before the last scene in the movie, it is revealed, you know how I set up the evil brother a little bit early on, the corrupt cop? I'm trying to give you the short version. He is brought in for one of the adult moments in this adult film that they are making. And there are two subjects with bags over their heads, and him and his brother are doing things. And it is revealed in a moment where the bags are taken off that his brother is with his wife and he is with his son. After a struggle, he ends his brother, and then in the final scene in the movie, they all end up, the family, so him, his wife, and his son end up in bed together at the very end in their house, just like cuddling, completely all traumatized, and it's silently kind of agreed on that they need to end because what they've gone through is so traumatic that they can no longer live on. And so that happens, but there's more. The final ending of the film, which I think is probably what they're talking about. We haven't even got to it. Basically, the next day, some time has passed and they're laying there, ended, and the film crew enter their home, and then you can hear someone's fly of their pants unzipping. Whew. And that is the iceberg. There were so many fun moments in there, and then it ended like that. But that's how these go, guys. That's how these go. If you do like videos like this, there's only one way I can figure that out: with your comments, with your thumbs up, and by subscribing. Then I'll know to put myself through this trauma once again for you guys. I do it all for you. It's all for you, Damien. The iceberg was definitely a little bit different than what I had expected from infamous scenes. I think it's very much catered towards the person who created it, but it was a journey. Don't forget to check out some other disturbing videos I have a bunch. I do a lot of disturbing movies and a lot of titles you may not have heard of. I really try and find different ones. So check these ones out, and I'll talk to you all very soon. Stay safe and stay spooky. Bye, friends.